We've got a returning guest. Dan Locke is here. The last video we talked about how he got into Scientology and when he was in Portland, Oregon, and then joined the Sea organization in Los Angeles. And he's here to continue his story, right, Janice?
Yes, we have Dan back. So we're going to have some good stories and some good laughs.
Absolutely. Right after this, stay tuned. Welcome, everybody. My name is Mark Fisher. Our channel is Scientology Peeling the Onion, and I'm here with my co-host, Janice Gillum-Grady. How you doing today, Janice?
Good, Mark. Good day, everybody. And it's as usual. It's another good day of peeling the onion.
Absolutely. And did you notice anything different about me today?
About you today? Yes. Well, we talked about it earlier. You got a new stool.
I do. I'm actually sitting taller because people would complain about the old stool that I had here at my bar that would squeak all the time when I moved. Well, I went out and I bought like a solid wooden stool, and the only problem is it's about 2 or 3 inches higher, so I had to adjust my camera and all that, but you shouldn't hear any squeaking anymore.
That's good. There's a lot of viewers who are going to be happy about that.
Absolutely. Well, anyway, so without further ado, we'll go ahead and we'll introduce our guest, Dan Locke. He's a longtime Scientologist and Sea Org member, and people enjoyed his last video interview that we did, and we're going to carry on with the story. So without further ado, we're just waiting for him to get in frame.
There we go.
How you doing, Dan?
Good,
you were moving
great.
around. I couldn't bring you up, and if you weren't out of frame.
Yeah, I'm arranging for a special surprise later on.
He had to get in position to get that halo behind him.
No, that halo follows me everywhere.
That's right. Hey, they don't call you Dial Wide Dan for nothing. That was one of the comments in the comments over the last video. Is that a nickname that you had?
Yeah, that was there was a program called Registration Program Number 2. It was from Ron Hubbard, and he said that all the people involved in sales should study a book called Big League Sales.
Yeah.
And part of Big League Sales was to establish for yourself an identity. He gave it as an example, a salesman. I think he sold shoes or something. The book was written in the 40s, so it was a very kind of interesting book. But anyway, this salesman, whatever he was selling, wore a green derby. He had a derby and he had it dyed green so that he would be immediately identified as the guy with the green derby who sold shoes. And people would talk about him and that kind of thing. And we actually had at Portland, Oregon, a guy who went out and bought a derby and painted it green and wore it every day. He was a director of clearing, a guy in charge of getting people to get new people into Scientology. Anyway, so there was a bunch of registrars between myself and the registrars at the mission. We didn't carry it quite so far. We just got nicknames and put them on our business cards. I remember mine, and then there was Lawrence Lynn, who had a little career in the Sea Org after his mission. He was Lawrence the Knife Lynn. And,
the knife?
The knife, like
Knife?
like a dagger or what have you, right?
Okay.
But I don't remember him carrying a dagger.
Sounds like a bouncer at a bar.
Yeah.
It does, yeah. And I mentioned before that, I'm pretty skinny now, but I used to be really skinny. So my first nickname was, let's call him the Floating Needle, because I was just kind of really skinny. So, but then that changed to Dan. Yeah.
There's got to be more to that for Floating Needle. It's not because you're skinny, because you bring laughter with you.
Yeah. Yeah. I think generally, all in all, I have to admit it, I had a lot of fun in Scientology. I mainly enjoyed it. I mean, there were certainly some dark times, etc. We can talk about those too, but it was, had lots of benefits, and I was generally a pretty happy guy. I think, a pretty happy guy. So that floating needle, and then it became Danny Dial-wide, and Dial for short. And then my senior for a while, Kenny Shapiro, would say, "Aren't you glad you used Dial?" And that was after a kind of soap that was around in the 70s
Oh,
called
that's
Dial
right.
soap. Yeah, yeah. But anyway,
Dan, can you explain to our viewers who were never in what it means by dial wide? What does that mean, dial wide?
well, I imagine most people who are watching this have had at least some familiarity with an e-meter. An e-meter was there to help an auditor do various things, and mainly find things to address with Scientology. But it was also used as an indicator of when someone was done with the Scientology procedure. It would, the needle, which would generally, we'll call my finger a needle for the moment, it would generally read, now I don't know your perspective over there, but a fall to the right as the auditor was reaching it, was looking at it. This is to my right. That would be considered a read, as long as it got past about a quarter of an inch. And they take those reads up. But at the end result of a properly run process, that needle might seem to be unrestrained, and it would have like a float of, generally it would be rather small. You could have a big wind with a little float, but generally speaking, a bigger wind, a larger amount of release would result in a wider float. And a float that went the whole width and breadth of the dial, which was about like that, would be called a dial wide FN. And then it could also be so wide with a phenomenal wind where you'd have to adjust something else on the meter to keep it on the dial, and that would be called a floating tone arm.
That's right.
Right.
So the auditor was supposed to only say, "Your needle's floating." He wouldn't say, "Oh my goodness, your needle's you got a floating TA, man." But you might be feeling that
tone arm.
enthusiasm. Yeah. Yeah. So it was pretty neat. So anyway, that was my nickname, because, and it was kind of interesting because when you have a nickname like that, let's say you're generally happy, but then if your name is Danny Dialwide, it almost obligated you to be in continual enthusiasm.
Yeah.
I mean, if you went around with just a small smile, they kind of go, "Hey, wonder what's the matter with him today?" You know. But
So anyway, you had business cards made up, right?
yeah, and you can see that's what a mark, other than myself being on the meter, that's kind of a miniature representation of what an e-meter would look like between the early 60s and until Ron came out with the Mark 7 in the late 80s or 90s. I forgot when it was. But for the longest
Right.
time, over 20 years, that on the right-hand side, you see what's supposed to represent a wood grain. The meter would be made out of wood, plastic, metal, and circuitry. But the entire back of it and a lot of the case was made out of wood. And that
Right.
symbol, that Scientology symbol, was there. And
Yep.
then it would fold. You could fold it up on itself and it'd be like a jewelry case or a cigar box, that kind of appearance. But when you opened it up, it would hinge in the middle, and the meter, all the working phenomena, would be on the front. So that's my name and phone number. And this card was when I was posted as a registrar for ASHO and AO in New York. So it's a 212 phone number. I think it's still the New York Org's phone number inside. I mean, now. And inside there's a couple of LRH quotes and some more contact data. So that would be what I'd hand out.
Who drew the caricature of you?
Oh, yeah, that's a good story. Yeah. I don't know for how long. I think 30, 40 years, I believe, from the 30s through the 60s. There was a famous Sunday Times, and, newspapers would have comics quite regularly in them. And one of them became very famous over the years. It was called Pogo.
Yeah.
And it had kind of political and cultural undertones. When I was a kid, it was considered an adult comic. I mean, I would read it as a kid, and I couldn't figure it out. But my dad would laugh at it, At any rate, I believe Walt had a little bit of time in Scientology, but definitely his daughter did, whose name was Carolyn Kelly. She was frequently a student at ASHO, wonderful person. At any rate, somehow or another, she did this card for me. and it's the only one I'm not aware of any other Scientology cards that she made, but I had a lot of fun with it. It's just
That's great.
and you can see there's some evidence that I used to have hair there too.
It's very cute.
People remember you as that.
Yeah, it's very cute with the one hand hanging onto the needle and the leg wrapped around the needle.
Yeah, right. She was quite an artist. And I just finally found her. I tried for years to find her, and I just, digging up this photograph, I found out she passed away in 2017 from a cancer. But what a girl! Hopefully there'll be people that view this that remember her, and if so, get in touch with me, because I don't have a lot of stories, but every one of them, just a wonderful sweetheart of a person.
Yeah.
Janice, you had something you wanted to talk about with Dan about Portland. Go ahead.
Oh yeah, the missions, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, because in 1977 I went on a recruitment mission for auditors, and from that we drove all the way up through San Francisco to the Davis mission, and then we even went up to the Portland, Oregon mission, and we went to Delphi in Sheridan, and I'll tell you, Martin Samuels had a lot of those missions. He had an incredible expansion going. You walk in those course rooms and there must have been like 50, 60 people on course.
Yeah.
I mean, and it wasn't just one mission. It was all his missions. They were just buzzing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So we talked a little bit before starting this conversation about what I might talk about. We're thinking about just going into Los Angeles, but I said there's one thing I really want to talk about before we talk about Los Angeles, and that is those missions. The missions Martin Samuels was, I don't know how far back he went into Scientology. I didn't talk with him very often, but he was the mission holder, the head executive over, at that time, a Scientology center. We called them missions at the time, in Davis, California, and in Sacramento, California. And the newest one at that time, or in 1976, I believe, or 1977, he initiated a mission, little office. I shouldn't say little, it was little only for a very short time, in Portland. And then subsequently, some years later, I think in 81 or so, there was one more mission that occurred in San Francisco. But all these missions were called COSMOD, Church of Scientology, acronym, Church of Scientology Missions of Davis. So it was COSMOD Davis, COSMOD Portland, COSMOD Sacramento, and then eventually COSMOD San Francisco.
Yeah, and just so people know, Davis, Joel, just so people understand, Davis is Davis, California, the town of Davis.
Yeah. Right.
Okay.
Yeah. And you see, those were Davis, as well as Sacramento, all had state universities that were very popular.
Right.
So their public was people going to college. They would go into these college areas and get people to sign up. Now, a little bit about Portland org activity before the mission came to town. As staff members, we were always taught, make it go right with green on white. We were taught not to accept any administrative procedures that wasn't evident in a policy letter. So you'd read something, and there weren't for auditors, there was training procedures to bring about results. You'd read bulletins, but then you have a training procedure where you pretty well learn the process and be able to competently deliver it. Yeah.
Let me just explain. Policy letters were printed green on white, and bulletins, which were technical, were printed red on white. And the policies were administrative and the bulletins were technical.
Right. Yeah. And we're talking ink, green ink, red ink on white paper.
Yes.
Yeah. So Scientology organizations are pretty authoritarian. Nobody wants to do anything incorrectly. So there's kind of often a little bit of anxiety in a Scientology organization in terms of getting things done, because at different periods of time, Scientology's organizations are not necessarily running well. It's not like a lot of organizations, there's difficulties and your brow is furrowed with consternation of like, how am I going to figure this out? And if you ask that very long, somebody's going to hand you a policy letter. And it's not going to be anything at all like being mentored by an expert. You're studying Ron and just doing the best you can. And another interesting thing is being on policies validated, off policy, you're not really supposed to think up stuff on your own and just, hey, I've got a great idea. If you say, hey, I've got a great idea, no, your idea, something better is supposed to already be in policy letter. So you might dream up things, you might dream up something for wonderful expansion, but unless you're a really extrovert person, which I try to be, but I don't know if I always pulled it off, you generally didn't challenge the status quo and try and do anything, that was like a big idea, unless you could find its roots in policy letters. Now, if you look through volume 6, which is the organization executive course dedicated to distribution or getting new people involved in Scientology, there's things like starting groups. There's a field staff member program, which said, our field auditors now become staff. You guys out there in the field are auditing. We're going to give you commissions if you send people to the organizations. There was a dissemination drill which people could learn, which would have you address their people's difficulties and that kind of stuff. But there wasn't any really broad program in there on how to get people in. Another one was like, oh, let's build a campaign for salespeople and call up sales offices. Roger had this thing going on in the 50s, yes, just a couple episodes ago. But those were written in the 50s and they weren't part of any current Ron Hubbard program. So it wasn't being pushed. And in the orgs, we didn't do anything unless we were pushed. We were pushed in all sorts of different directions. But it was just trying to comply with a steady stream of orders. And the result was we would go weeks at the Portland org without anybody new coming in. They get a person. Oh, the line at the time was somebody managed to come in, you give them a personality task, and then the person in Division 6 would try to find what the person's difficulty is and sell them on the communication course. Well, these guys were having a very, very difficult time pulling it off. And we get people through the comm course and the communications course. It was difficult for people. So people didn't come out of it necessarily just like always enthusiastic. Well, in comes this mission, in comes this new activity into Portland, Oregon. We were in downtown Portland at the time, and they moved about half a mile away from us. And the org was like, wow, it wasn't announced. There was no preparation. They just arrived, So I go up and see them, and there's, I don't know at the time, I think 30 or 40 people, already twice as big as we were. All of them young people, dressed well, in nice, not over the top premises like, ideal org premises, but clean premises, And all of a sudden, within minutes, I had 30 new Scientologist friends, that just doubled my friendship, like boom, like that. And, what are you guys doing here? Well, we're a Scientology mission. And I had never heard of these guys before. Anyway, it didn't take long to find out they were just amazing. And what they did is they sent people out on the street. We had never heard of the term before. I think they may have invented it. Body routers. Now, nowadays, it's a common phrase. But before they arrived into Portland, you're not going to find body routing in Volume 6 of the OEC. Ron never said, send out a dozen staff members. As far as I know, you got something contrary on that, Janice?
Well, I remember in 76 when I was in the relay unit in Los Angeles to Hubbard, he had me do a inspection of the test center. And the test center had just been set up in the Hollywood Inn building, the one on Hollywood Boulevard. where Holly was in the basement of that. And anyway, so I did a whole inspection, and there were body routers then in 76.
Cool. Well, I don't know how far back
Yeah, it did go.
COSMOD
It went back.
initially goes.
It went back in this. It went back into the 70s because I came in the Washington D.C. organization, and Bill Franks was the commanding officer at one
Oh,
point,
yeah.
And they were doing it
literally. Well, I
Yep.
was a public person there. I was public, getting off services and stuff. But they would have their evening muster at 6:45, before this, starting stuff. He would send out. This wasn't every night, but he would send everybody out onto the main Connecticut Avenue, which was a half a block away from the organization, and tell them everybody needed to body route somebody in for an introductory lecture before they could go back on post, except unless they were delivering services to the public. And so I remember seeing that then too. But it was considered a successful action. But you had to be in an area where there were people. If there were no people, how are you going to body route them?
Well, I was in DC in 75, and Bo was the distribution sec, and he would body route.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
All right. So that's good. But I don't believe it is in policy. So this is a case of like somebody having initiative, and talk about a guy who had an initiative. It's our old EDM friend who just mentioned, who was at FCDC for a long time. Bill Franks.
Bill Franks.
Yeah. He just got things done. That's what he did. But at any rate, these young men and young women, and we were really close to, they were really close to Portland State University, which was a big college, big university within a few blocks too. So that's what they did. They just sent their handsome young men and handsome young women to go attract people into the mission. I never watched their Red Cycle, but I did talk with them about their comm course. I said, well, tell me about the comm course here. How are you guys getting these wins on the comm course? And I couldn't remember everything, but amongst the things I remember was that they really cleared the words OTTR0. OTTR0 is the first drill in the communication course, and it just has a person sit down in a chair, approximately 3 feet in front of another person sitting down in a chair, and your eyes are closed, and you're just supposed to be there, not do anything else other than be there. The basic thing, and these training routines are to train an auditor to be comfortable in what are sometimes long sessions, to be careful and good in his communication. But they're also taught to us, or it was given to public people, as this is the first step on your route to getting your life handled. You have to be in better communication with people. You're going to have to be, this is an important skill. And so OT and OTTR0 means operating Thetan. So now I'll explain that in just a moment. But you're taking a new person, never heard of Scientology until this body router talked with them. And you managed to sell them a course, which cost at that time, the mission charged twice as much as the org did. We charged $25 at the org. They charged $50. So there's already a higher concept of value that the mission gave it. So they sit down a person in the course room, and they say, we're going to clear this word up. And the first word you're going to clear is operating Thetan. You can imagine that. An operating Thetan is a being who has no mass, no motion. Thetan, first of all, is something that has no mass, no motion, no wavelength, no position in space or time, but has the power to postulate and perceive and consider, something like that. So you clear that word. Basically, it means a very capable, kind of a big idea for who a person actually natively is.
Say, a spiritual being, a spirit.
Well, a spirit or a ghost.
Right.
Yeah, but with all these capabilities,
Exactly.
No, I understand
right.
that. Yeah, but that's what you're talking about here.
Yeah. But still, you'd think that there might be something else that would be talked about, but that's what they did. They cleared these words. So instead of like an average person coming in, giving the issue, not clearing that concept, etc., and as a fellow who's been pulled in and talked with about his problems, or a young woman who sits down is just a young woman or a young man who's probably still muddled in his problems or her problems.
Right.
Instead, this person sits down and immediately He sits there. I'm sitting down here as a being, who's got all these capabilities. And so I thought that was pretty interesting. Another interesting thing that they did is they assigned every person who came into the mission to do a service was assigned one or two staff members. Those two staff members were responsible for that new person in. And they would talk with them throughout the week to make sure that they were doing good. Not just, hey, how are you? But
Yeah,
how'd it
right.
go today? Do you have any wins? Are you still having a little difficulty on that? Really? Okay. Okay. Well, tell me more about that. Okay. I'm going to get that to your supervisor because you know something that you're supposed to be winning here. So
Right.
if you're not, we got to take care of that. So there's this thorough responsibility. And if one of those guys didn't show up the next day, it wasn't like, oh, find his word. It's like, let's interview the staff members who signed to that person and how did this happen?
Right.
So it's really interesting because virtually every single staff member had a responsibility, whether they were in treasury, dealing in accounts, or running the Mimeo machine or whatever, they had a responsibility for a
Yeah.
real person to keep them winning. And there's a reference in lots of references. Basically, at the lowest part of the bridge, one finds the roughest auditing conditions, and it's most essential that a person gets wins. Scientologists all know this. If you give a guy a whole lot of wins at the beginning, in the first few weeks of their involvement, well, you can, as we found out through our own lives of having mud slung at us and torpedoes thrown at us, if you get all those wins, you can withstand a lot of abuse basically afterwards, or things not going right for you necessarily.
Right.
Because you got this solid foundation. Hey, if I know this was worked, we can get it going again. I'd like more of those wins, So anyway, on that basis of that validation of the person, ongoing validation of the person, ongoing responsibility of every staff member to make sure that their new coming people got wins, they took that organization. I think when I left the area in 78, they had over 100 staff members. Another thing that they had a requirement that every staff member had to be a class 4 auditor, at least to begin with, which meant also being a Dianetic auditor at that time. I think they relaxed that later on, but for the longest time, you had to be a trained auditor, even to be
Right.
considered to be on staff. So you just had these trained, capable people, high levels of responsibility. And instead of having one or two guys like that, overwhelmed by all the unhadded, untrained people that hadn't had very many wins, it was just this robust crew of people that could take on seemingly just about anything. Yeah.
I was going to say, now the difference between a mission like COSMOD, in those days, and an organization like you weren't getting paid any money. Whereas a mission holder like Martin Samuels, he controls the finances and he can pay his staff whatever he wants to. Whereas the executive director of an organization or commanding officer, the upper management would take money from that organization, so there wasn't enough money to pay the staff a living wage.
Yeah.
Plus, there are a lot of extra staff that should have, rather than being on administrative stuff, should have been put on production. Your FBOs, your flag reps, your LRH communicators. It was like, come on, one person can probably just do all that. You don't need to post each of them, and then you only have one auditor.
Yeah.
Right. And this caused a big problem in Scientology in the late 70s and early 80s, because you had missions like Martin Samuels, tremendously successful, Kingsley Wimbush, very successful, John Woodruff, all these people who they were mission holders, and they had a whole network of them, and they were making money because that's how Hubbard wanted it set up. You just send your 10%, I think it was, or whatever, maybe, I don't know what it was.
It was 10%
to Scientology, and then you could do what you want, right? So, but then it became, quote unquote, a problem because these missions were larger than the organizations who were supposed to be in a senior position to them, and their staff were better paid. They had better living conditions and better working conditions. So a lot of staff would, at the end of their contract, they'd want to quit and then go be staff over at the mission. I mean, Scientology management was self-defeating in that manner.
Yeah.
Yes, totally.
Anyway,
The mission, the
want to
three
point
stable
that out.
data I remember about missions were, one is that they could charge whatever they wanted as long as it was at least as much as the org charged. They couldn't charge less. Their tech had to be standard, but their admin, you could make it up. You didn't have to
Yep.
follow anything. It was just like, that's up to you, what you stress or don't stress, what you favor or whatever. And so these guys just weren't restrained at all. They didn't have to
Right.
go check and get an okay or something approved. They said, hey, I got an idea. Let's do this. And boom, they did it. So it was really fascinating to watch.
But also
Yeah.
weren't missions limited to, I may be wrong about
Oh,
this.
yeah,
They could
just
only
up
deliver
through
up to
HSDC.
Dianetics,
Yeah.
up to Dianetics auditor
Yeah.
training. And then could they actually deliver Scientology counseling on the grades, or did they have
Yeah.
to send them to the organization?
No,
Great.
all the way through
Okay,
the grades.
so they only could train up to be a Dianetic auditor. Then they had to go to the organization to do what was called their academy levels, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
And that became basically my job for some years after that. The mission was pretty much, I mean, our organization did much better because I would get these SDC grads already happy to just, be very happy to spend $1,000 for, their academy levels courses,
Right.
So
Right.
it was
And
like
wouldn't the
no
mission-
effort to sign them up at all.
And wouldn't the missions get like a field staff member commission for
uh-huh.
sending people? Yeah. See, so the whole idea was it was a feeder line, get people in, get them in, and then send them to the organization, and then eventually up to the advanced organization. That was the whole idea that Hubbard had in terms of how
Right.
it would work.
It was interesting though too, because one thing they did, they were very aggressive registrars, and I'm not saying this is always right, but they had it right in their own mind. They would clean those people out and their families. They would send people home to mom and dad, and it was because before credit cards, and these guys are mainly students, so it was a lot of people calling their families for their purchases.
Who are you saying they would? As in
The mission registrars.
The mission registrars.
And a registrar is a salesperson, just for people to understand. Yeah.
That's one of the things that got them in trouble. They kind of overpromised to the Julie, forget her name.
Christofferson.
Yeah, Christofferson. Promised her her eyesight would be handled or whatever, different physical maladies, but they would oftentimes get so much money from generally their families. Sometimes you get some really affluent person, but sometimes it was a miracle that these guys had $1,000 they could find for the academy levels. They were so thoroughly regged at the time,
Now,
but
Julie
Christofferson.
Now that you brought up her name, she was Mission Public, and then she sued the Portland Mission and the org.
Primarily, as I understood it, I didn't study it deeply. I by the time that blew up, I was already in Los Angeles, and and talking with people about it and reading up a little bit about it since then. Basically, they promised physical healings. I remember particularly her eyesight problems would go away.
Right.
And that's the problem with a lot of Scientology's problems is over promising. Even in Ron's own writings, if we had just said, hey, you're going to feel a lot better and better and better and better as you go along, without promising particularly a physical ailment resolved, you just can't do that. And it's actually said in policy, but people had and the problem is, although Ron said we couldn't do it, we couldn't promise that. His books promise that. Dianetics promises that.
And the grade chart, chart lists out different achievements, which were promises that aren't correct. Yeah. Yep.
I myself, when things go wrong and there's a little bit of difficulty in my life, I don't always turn to Scientology. Sometimes I find a nutrient like this, because it's not always a mental phenomena. Sometimes you got to take care of your physically as well.
He is showing, just for our viewers there. He's showing Koala Calm, which we
Yeah.
sell, Outback Natural. Just go down below. There's a link if you'd like. It's a magnesium drink that helps with your stress level, helps you sleep, and all that sort of stuff. Anyway, that's really cute.
Thank you, Dan.
Yeah, we need, you probably should make it a requirement for your guests, because it's like, your guests are, even if it's for their 15 minutes or hour long of fame or whatever, they're little celebrities for a little while. And there's nothing like a celebrity endorsement, and then we could all sing a jingle together. Let's see if we can get a jingle figured out for
Koala Calm. Yeah, that would be funny.
Koala Calm.
Yeah, do a Koala Calm jingle.
Or for the joint formula.
There you go.
Yeah.
It's
we can't see it, but that's okay. Yeah.
We need to have the Tin Man for that one, for the joint pain.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So are we done with the missions and we want to go back to LA? Where are we at?
Well, just that phenomenon. It's interesting to me. I just want to allude to one other thing while I'm at it. For a long time, my role in different works has been to be a chaplain. And I tell you, there's just so many people that have had wins in Scientology. And I've seen it on your what do they call? Is this called a podcast? Is that what these things are called?
No, it's our video, our YouTube channel.
Okay.
Yeah.
I've seen it on your shows. Let's call it a show.
Right.
You get some guy at the start of the deal, he might be a little kind of, but you start talking with him about his experiences in Scientology, and wins are going to come out whether or not they're still involved or not. Wins are going to come up, and there's just always something there to rehab, to get back interested again. And I just want to say, because there might not be another opportunity to say it, and I'm thinking it right now. If you had wins in Scientology, there's more available. You don't have to go into a church. I imagine Janice and Mark, I know I do. We've got plenty of names of people that are good, competent, capable people, once long involved in the Church of Scientology. Some are even getting trained since, that are available to get you winning without any church connection at all. I know several, I talked with this guy recently. He's getting a bunch of auditing from a field auditor, and he's having wins like crazy from this ex-corporate church field auditor. And he's got a bunch of friends in the professional world who have been getting wins on the official church. But he never brings up to them the fact that he's getting auditing as well in the independent field. And because he doesn't want to lose that communication line. So you have these Scientologists winning in different worlds, but not telling each other their wins. Because those guys, I don't know, it's just kind of strange to me, But
that's because those in the independent field, the Church of Scientology considers them squirrels because they're not a part of their group. But some of those guys apparently are better auditors than what they have in the church, from what I've heard.
Certainly more experienced.
Yeah, and these are people who believe in the technology that they learned in Scientology, but they disagree with the church structure and its management and the direction that it's going. Like we've said before, people can believe whatever they want. You know what I mean? We're not going to tell them not to believe, but what we do preach against is the disconnection policy and the things that tear families and people apart, the abuses of the Scientology organization, right? So you could have an independent field auditor or counselor who's doing really well because it's just him or her doing it and delivering, and people are having successes with it. So we're not making judgment on that, but if people want to pursue that, they can. But I just wanted to make that distinction because those people that are out in the independent field, they're out there because they disagree with David Miscavige and the direction and the abuses of Scientology. Even though some of them were written by L. Ron Hubbard, they still believe in the technology that they learned, and they feel like they're helping other people, and they see it every day. That's all I'm going to say about that.
Yeah.
I just came out of the closet as a Independent.
Careful,
Are people
Dan.
still going
Some
to be
people.
nice to me? But,
Well,
Well, they might.
it's your right. It's your right to do whatever it is that you want. You don't have to have Scientology telling you what to do anymore, and that's
Yeah.
another thing that we didn't like about Scientology. But anyway,
Yeah.
let's get back to when you were back in the Sea Organization in Los Angeles. I think were you at ASHO at that point or AOLA? I couldn't remember.
Oh, okay, cool. All right. So I came to ASHO in 1979. The circumstances, and this a little bit, did I talk about our son? I had a little boy that grew up in the Sea Organization.
No.
Okay. So there's a rule that came out, I think it was it would have been early sometime in 19, that's going to be quite a bit later. Okay, cool. I'll come to that later on. So 1979, I came down. I do remember I talked about having been taking LSD, and that was kind of like a buy now to get me to,
Right.
yeah. Okay,
Right.
so come down, do the EPF, and this was when all the Pacific area organizations had moved into Hollywood, a street that was called Berendo. It's now called L. Ron Hubbard Way.
Yeah.
And
Big
there were
Blue.
these, they were all these old, at the time it was big, dirty beige. They were all just very bland colors before it was big blue.
It was a hospital.
It was a hospital. And
Yeah.
so I guess I got there about 8 or 10 months after the first people had moved in. And so that was a really ugly, ugly series of buildings. It was just so big and so ugly. And I don't remember how much later, I think it was 2 or 3 years later, before Ron's advices or instructions regarding giving a new paint job came into place. But for a couple of years, it was just like, it was just so horrible to look at.
No, you're right.
But it was big. And so it was fun. And there was a lot of staff members there, a lot of people on staff. I don't know. It's kind of a mixed thing in my own mind because I was very aware at the time I moved. How do I put this? In 1978, while I was still in the Portland, Oregon organization, a bulletin came out called, and a company, LRHED, called 1978, the year of lightning fast technology. And it was a presentation at the end of 1978 where Ron had basically, in maybe a 25 or 30 page bulletin, discussed all the breakthroughs that had been brought about in the last year. And coincident with that, or perhaps a little bit before, they started increasing the prices by 5% a month. Ron said it was called the solution to inflation. He said, basically, our prices have remained constant for several years as inflation has increased throughout the world. And we're going to do something about it now. So effective next March, next 31st of the month or whatever, we're going to increase the prices 5% a month. And we thought, fine. And we called it a buy now. And that was justification. Oh, we've had it so cheap for so long. At any rate, I think everybody thought that might go on for 5 or 6 months. But by the time I went to ASHO, it had been going on for over a year. And the prices so it's 5% cumulative. I don't know. I think by that time they may have doubled. And I had heard that similar to ourselves at the Portland Org, I was hearing the mission regis talk about, hey, when are these prices going to stop? And they were already on a strong momentum roll dealing with affluent people. They weren't suffering like the organization was with that. So coming into Los Angeles, I got put pretty much immediately on registrar lines because I'd been successful at it before. And just a couple things to note about ASHO. Mark and I talked about this earlier. ASHO had this wonderful place on the bridge. First of all, there's a thing that came out called Dianetic Clear in 1978 as well, where Ron said that he made a discovery that you could go clear by auditing Dianetics. Now, that might be confusing because he said that 28 years before then as well. But for some time, since the late 60s, Ron believed that you could only go clear after going through the grades and getting a special course called the clearing course. Well, in 1978 says no further research, makes us believe that you can go clear on Dianetics. So people all over the world have been co-auditing on Dianetics for years and years and years, because the first major course you did in org or at a mission was a Hubbard Center Dianetics course, and people would sit down, buddy up, and audit, typically for hundreds of hours. I myself audited at least 600 hours back and forth at any rate, and had wonderful wins. So all of a sudden, Ron came out, and before this, there was like 4,000 acknowledged clears in the world. Ron came out with a bulletin and said, you could have gone clear on Dianetics. A whole bunch of people went, well, maybe that's what happened to me. And there was places you could go to get that stamped. You go through a little process. Some organizations were allowed to do this, and says, you're validated as a clear. And so the directive from Ron to clears at that time. And so within a few months, the number of clears went from, I believe, 4,000, 5,000 up to 20,000. And then a year after that, up to 30,000. And these would be all announced in the auditor. Now there are 30,274 clears, and they go org by org on fine print. You'd see all the clears. And I was one of them. I was clear number 9,600. And I could see my friends.
I was Dianetic clear too, and I was my clear number was 9766. Because
Hello, neighbor.
Clear number. I still remember my clear number.
We were probably still in the same issue of the auditor.
I don't remember mine. I think mine was in the 1,000s or 2,000s.
Yeah, because you probably did the old clearing course, right, Janice?
I did. I did power processing and R6EW and the old clearing course.
Yeah, I did. I missed
all the old OT levels up to OT7 before the NED for OTs came out.
Right.
Yeah, cool. So now prior to that Dianetic clear activity, all roads led through ASHO. All United States roads on the way to OT went through ASHO, because ASHO
in Los
had
Angeles,
a thing called the American St. Hill Organization of Los Angeles, based off of the St. Hill Organization of the UK. It was the American St. Hill Organization, and where you're unique in Los Angeles in that virtually every other place where the higher levels were delivered had their St. Hill and their advanced organizations in the same, delivered by the same crew. Right. But in Los Angeles, for whatever reason, I forgot, there was two separate organizations, and people would come to LA to American St. Hill Organization to do their power processing, and then they, walk down the street or across the street, depending on what time it was or year it was, to do their OT levels, their clearing course and OT levels at the Advanced Organization of Los Angeles.
Right.
So anybody who went to do their OT levels went through ASHO and got their power. And the clever ASHO registrars, they had put together a package with management's authorization. If you bought the briefing course, you could get power at half price and your solo course for free. So it actually ended up being cheaper to get your briefing course with your solo course for free and your power at half price than to skip the briefing course. So virtually almost everybody who bought power and went on to do their OT levels had their briefing course on account. They might not do it at that time, but there were literally hundreds of people who had their briefing course paid for at ASHO and went on to do their OT levels. And we all knew at ASHO we could call them up later on and get them on to their briefing course once they got through their OT levels.
Janice, can you explain what the briefing course is?
Well, yeah, that's order to class 6. That's you do order to train up to class 4. Nowadays, I think it's called class 5. And but you did that at a class 4 org, and then you went to ASHO and you actually did a lot of retread of some of the 0 to 4, but also the wall of tapes. And that was all the various different lectures by Hubbard to make
It's hundreds of them, right? They were
hundreds,
all the ones.
Yeah,
the ones he gave at St. Hill originally in the 1960s was called the briefing course, and you had to listen to those tapes.
Yeah, my parents were actually there on the original briefing course in 1962.
Yeah.
So
Closer to 500 than 400 tapes. It's a lot
Okay.
of tapes. Yeah. All in
Yeah.
chronological order, too. And oh, by the way, is this too much detail? Should I just get cut
No,
out?
no,
And
no.
you
But
speak up?
you move on from here. But we just wanted to explain to them what the briefing course was.
Okay, cool. So at any rate, this was a guarantee. So basically, everybody who went to AO on the way spent about $1,400 minimally at ASHO for their briefing course and their power at half price. Sometimes they might buy an intensive or two, uh, as well. And of
Yeah.
course, so what happened is when Dynet Clear came out, everybody just went straight to the AO. And that's
They
when I
skipped
arrived
over
at
ASHO.
ASHO.
Yeah.
I went to ASHO when there was nothing obligatory to do at ASHO because virtually everybody, there were a few years where we didn't deliver any power at all because there's just everybody was going clear on Dynetics.
right.
And Dynetics, by the way, had a wonderful reputation for years and years and years before then as one of the most wonderful things to do on the processing side of the grade chart. People were aching for it, and at the time, Ron had promised us superpower, although it wasn't released until 6 or 7 or 8 years ago. It was actually promised 46 years ago in 1978. And we all thought at the time that it was going to be imminent and it would come to ASHO's rescue, in terms of having our own processing service to deliver.
Right.
That just never happened. But at any rate, so what I went into is an org that was having a very, very difficult time finding people to sell things to. Because even Ron was saying, now that you're clear, you're in the non-interference zone, you got to go to OT3 as fast as possible. And the AO regs were preaching that like crazy as well.
Right.
And we were having to pull old 1950s essays about the importance of being trained,
Yeah.
No other reg in the world was saying that at all. It was like, get to your OT levels, So it was difficult at ASHO, but there was good, earnest people. But there were, oftentimes people go, oh, wow, Sea Org members only get paid $50 a month. I don't remember a week where we got that much pay. It was so often. It was so often $5 or $10 or nothing.
I think you guys were lucky to even get food.
Yeah, and that was our fare. Was I don't know how long. I don't want to exaggerate. It was at least a year or two. It was frequently the case where beans and rice was lunch and dinner, and oatmeal was breakfast for a long, long time.
Right.
But anyway, but still, overall, because we were earnest and because we were sincere on belief about training, and we had most of it had training. Us had some training at least. We considered training as valuable, and we did keep selling it, and we did find people to buy it.
Because you had the SHSBC, the Central Special Briefing course, to train them to Class 6, but you also had the Class 8 course.
After a while, it used to be an AO only service, but after a while it was granted to us. Also, a couple years after this change happened, we were also given OT preps and Solo 2 at the same time that the orgs were given Solo 1. Solo 1 and Solo 2 are courses to teach you how to audit yourself, which is what you do on the OT level.
I think we're getting way down in the weeds here.
Yeah. But you'd like to define the term, so I thought I'd get it in there quickly.
Yeah.
But at any rate, maybe that's a little too far in the weeds. Okay, I'll let you direct things here.
So the point of your story? Go ahead.
Well, okay, so I kind of lost my track a little bit. But at any rate, so it was good. And, there's still people, the problem with training is that there's these training courses, and then there's a thing called the internship where people get better trained to deliver these services. But the amount of people that get that training and then go on to an internship is a small fraction. And then the amount of people that do the internship and then go on to actually audit in the world, in the field, or for an organization is also smaller. But there are some auditors, and I'm thankful that I know them. There's some people that made that great big leap from all that training to an internship and then have been successful in the field as well, which is where I think if we're still going to have any definite good impact on the world, I think whatever impact that is being felt on the world by virtue of any Scientology application is by and large due to auditors who remain auditing in the field without any vested interest of a benefit for themselves, totally for the benefit of the person that they're helping out. Thankfully, there's quite a bit of that still occurring.
Now, Dan, I have to play a devil's advocate here because we have viewers who are never in, and all they say, how could you say such things about Scientology? It's a cult, it's this, it's that, tear apart family, all these negative things and all that. So how do you justify, or how do you reason with that? Because it did do these things.
Okay, well, an early thing I was told by my brother who got me in, I think it was my brother, it might have been somebody else. So you got to recognize in Scientology, there's two things. There's Scientology and there's Scientologists, and you're going to meet some really funky, weird people in Scientology. And Scientology is, to a certain extent, I think, I'm not certain about this. One of the Scientology's levels, level 2, has a lot about moral codes in it. And Ron kind of explains moral codes as being kind of plastic and changeable culture to culture. At any rate, the Scientology culture and Scientology moral code has a lot of meanness in it. It's not a compassionate moral code that lives within the church, by my estimation. I now go to Catholic Mass a few times a week with my wife. I know Christianity also gets a slap in the face quite a bit from the world today. But let's just say this: despite Scientology's earnest efforts to help people become better, I think some people will just become better dicks or better bad people. Some of them, it doesn't guarantee. You have your own responsibility for who you are in life. You can't. Some of it goes forward, is benefited by Scientology, but if you're dealing unethically, and many Scientologists have, you got to own up to it. You can't really blame it on Scientology. I don't think Scientology makes unethical people. I just don't think it thoroughly rehabilitates every unethical person.
Well, Dan, one of the points, my dad, who had, was an old-time Scientologist and left and all that. When I left, he pointed two things out to me that he had noticed about Scientology. And when I say this, I'm really talking about the Scientology organization, is that it lacks love and it lacks the concept of compassion. Now, individual counselors and auditors, they do have that compassion, but the organization completely lacks it, because it's just a self-feeding machine that feels like it's got to roll over everybody in its path that might be resisting it, and it does not show any compassion towards families or towards other people who may disagree with them.
I'd like to note also in there, just kind of like a part of that, is that there's a Scientology technology, and there you can go to the axioms. You can find the axioms and logic, some of the basic tenets of Scientology. You'll find that permeating throughout all the auditing technology, or the strongest proportion of it. But there's lots of Scientology administrative procedures that are not based on anything Scientology. They're more, who was the dog, Pavlovian. Like, for instance, there's a big deal on rewards and penalties in the Church of Scientology. That's no part of Scientology. That's part of, punish a person for bad behavior. It's like how you train a dog. So, that shows up. There's this, if you're at a down stat, if you're having trouble in life, there might not be anyone to help you. You're certainly given a way far back seat to somebody who's rolling along and being successful. Even though you could say that the technology exists to help a person who's down on his luck or not doing well, it's just not exercised. The culture is pushed towards only validate the up stats. don't pay much attention to a guy in trouble, you know. So
Yeah.
that's
Well, having grown up in it and then in the Sea Org on top of that, Mark is so right about the lack of compassion.
yeah.
It's like somebody close to you dies and you're
Get back
not
to work.
allowed get back to work. You're not allowed any case on post,
Right.
And then if you say you want to go to a funeral, everyone's kind of, why would you want to do that? They're dead.
Right.
Where and you're not given any time to grieve.
Yeah.
And also growing up, you don't get any sympathy.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Right.
I mean, the story I heard about your mom, that's such a phenomenal, that kind of story over and over again. Someone who has been a phenomenal asset to the group. If they go into a downtrend by virtue of health or something like that, suddenly they're, they're in some lousy apartment at the
They're
Shane
discarded.
Garage, and somebody doesn't even show up to feed them right. Yeah, it's just like the worst
they're
thing in the world.
discarded, and they take the same point of view the organization does on people that are down on their luck out on the streets, or what I mean, or addicted to drugs. I mean, they offer help if you have drug addiction, if you have money.
Yeah.
But
Exactly.
they're not out there helping people out of generosity or charity like the Catholic Church. They're the biggest, as far as I know, the biggest charitable organization that helps the homeless and people on the street. I mean, shoot, there's huge organizations just here in Las Vegas, and that's where Catholic Charities, they feed them and they house them, and they don't do it. They don't charge them anything. But that's Scientology is all about the money and then the organization and all that. Even if they could help them, they won't. They don't lift a finger for that.
Right.
At the same time, I think that if there was a real Scientology program, let's take the homeless, they have the tools. If they would just bend a little bit in this kind of what we're talking about, they do have valid things that could help them out, but they don't.
Right, and then I just thought of the same thing with the way they treat staff living below the poverty line when they have billions now. When we were there, it was hundreds of millions. That's just in a war chest. That's just buying real estate rather than actually paying their staff a living wage and a place to live and that type of thing. They just hoard all this money. In other words, you're feeding the beast all the time, and the beast just is always hungry, and so therefore it doesn't really expand.
Yeah.
Well, just take David Miscavige's wardrobe, for instance. That wardrobe, even a pair of boots, would have given great bonuses to many staff members that, could use that help or, improve the food or the clothing of the various staff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Just another thing, it's a little bit of a down note. I know we're kind of nearing the end of our time here, but
we'll have you back.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. I just want to admit something, and it's to give you an idea of the failings that can happen to. Let's say you say I'm bright and happy and a nice guy and stuff, but that organization warped me to a certain extent. And here's a case in point. There was a while where people who sold books could get a commission. I forgot what it was, 5 or 10 or 5%, I think.
Yep. I thought it was 10%. 5, yeah,
maybe it was 10. I forgot.
Yeah, 10% book commission. Yeah.
Anyway, so there was a period of time, I think it lasted for about a year, where some of the regs were making phenomenal money by selling these books.
LRH libraries.
Yep.
They sell a whole library to somebody who's rich.
I heard some guys at Flag were like driving fancy cars and stuff around. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
Dan, part of what they did, which is very destructive, if they'd go through people's accounts to see what money they had on account. So maybe they had the St. Hill Special Briefing course on account, and they would then take that to have them buy books. So a commission's already been paid out to a field staff member on the training, and then another commission is paid out when it's transferred over to books, which then cuts into the pay and the welfare of the regular staff members.
Yeah, I saw that happen. I kept myself away from that sin I definitely did, but I saw others do that, and it was just such a betrayal. But what I did that was wrong when I did make commissions, you know, I think registrars generally have it a little bit more difficult than a lot of staff in terms of pressure and hours we got to put in and stuff like that. But not there's everybody worked hard on staff,
Right.
and some at very thankless jobs like the letter reg people or central files people working down in the basement 7 days a week, 11 or 12 hours, thankless, never stood up in front of the group and given applause, but they showed up day after day after day. Now I got in line with it, and I might have made $300 a week or two, or 600 even, something like that. And after a long time of not having money, and I can justify it by, I put most of that money, I get a car so I could go around and go to people's homes and reg them. It was all rationalized away. But the basic thing is I had a lot better than my fellow staff members. And nobody said, hey, the thing that bothers me the most, although I felt it in standing line, maybe I should just turn around this and distribute it to everybody. I didn't. And not only that, none of the wonderful people that I could have done that for said, hey, Dan, that's kind of not so good. Maybe you should take a look at, sharing that cash. We were all based, have been plugged into this environment where you're, if you win, you did it. And if you lost, you did it. There's so little responsibility truly for the other guy.
Right.
If you win, pat on the back, you're what a wonderful character. But if you're not winning, oh man, what a loser, And so I'm sorry to say that mentality got into me, and I think, and I think it was wrong that was allowed to exist, and I think the all us registrars should have really taken a look at ourselves and gone.
But I mean, really, the real thing that was wrong was the organization was set up that way, and not hoarding all this money and not paying just even a minimum wage. They weren't even paying a minimum wage. Anyway.
Well, they also did it with the auditors. All the auditors, as long as they did over 25 hours, everything, they got bonuses on all that. And meanwhile, the staff who's supporting them didn't.
Yeah. Right. Anyway, so a little bit of it, but all in all, I just, it's time to wrap up. Should I say some wrapping up kind of things? Okay.
Yeah, we're wrapping up.
From my point of view, overall, it is a benefit to society. It's not some cancer that should be rubbed out. I think these fellows that I've met, I won't mention by name, the naysayers that are on the internet, I appreciate it. They take a look at it and just realize that there's babies in that bathwater. It's actually crowded with babies. There's so many babies in the bathwater that there's not that much water. And what it is pretty dirty, but still, there's lots of valuable things about Scientology that would be, our time would be better spent on rescuing that information, deciphering it, pulling the wheat away from the chaff, and doing something to benefit. I'm kind of in a situation where I can't do anything else other than that. To take something that I put 35 years of my life into and say, oh, it was all stupid. I guess I'm kind of a vested interest in making something right out of it.
Right. Well, actually, Dan, now that you bring that up, I've actually heard that you might be an OSA plant.
Oh yeah, people were saying that about me.
Welcome. Yeah, I've heard that. I'm like, really? Let people have their own beliefs, Yeah.
Yeah, I've heard that, and it bothered me for a while, but then I just realized they're not that bothered. What can you do about that? You can't really prove you're not. So
hey, listen.
Well, I've been accused of being a plant. Hello.
Well, and you know what? We've had lots of terrible things said about us, and not just, you know what I mean? You just have to, you know the truth. You know what the truth is for yourself. But I just wanted to tell our viewers, and also Dan, we're going to have you on again because I'm sure our viewers would like to know, well, then if you think these things about Scientology, why aren't you part of the organization anymore? And we'll let you tell that story in terms of why you're no longer part of the organization, because I'm sure there's a lot of interesting things that happened on that too. And we'll just leave that as a teaser for the next one. Okay.
Right. Okay. And meanwhile,
All right.
stay ready for anything life throws at you.
Koala calm.
That's right. Get rid of that stress. Relax. Calm down.
I want to thank Dan for being here for our second show here. Please subscribe to our channel. Hit that subscribe button. Hit the like button. We really appreciate that. If you have any questions or comments, you can always comment down below. Dan reads them. He answered some of the ones last time. I read them. Janice reads them. So if you've got an opinion or something you want to express, please do so. We look for it there. And if you'd like to support our channel, you can buy us a coffee down in the link. Down in the description below, there's a link there that you click on and you can donate. We appreciate the support. And then finally, I'd like to mention, if you'd like to become a member of our channel, which is different than subscribing, on your PC or laptop, just go up to our homepage for our channel, Scientology Peeling the Onion. Right next to the subscribe button is a join button. Click on that. There's a little 3-minute video that we've done that explains membership and what you get for it. And it's another way for you to support our channel, and we greatly appreciate our members that we have already, and we are adding more. We added 2 more just the other day. So anyway, so we just wanted to mention that as well. Janice, you got anything else before I end off?
No, I think you pretty much covered it.
Okay.
So
Dan, thanks.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for dialing in on us.
Thank you.
Thanks,
very
Dan,
much.
for being here. Don't hang up,
Thanks,
Dan. We'll be
Dan.
back to you in just 1 minute, okay?
Okay.
Bye, everybody. We'll see you next time.